Episode 67 of the Boomtank Business Show. Today's guest on the show is Dr. Richard Swart, a renowned expert on angel investing and venture capital funding for women-owned businesses. We talk the future of large funding for women-owned businesses, lessons in entrepreneurship, and much more. This interview offers a rare glimpse into how top startups by women that have the potential to generate millions and hundreds of millions of dollars get funded and what they face in doing so. Dr. Swart is a fellow at the Milken Institute and has worked with such leading global organizations as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and others. He has also worked with the World Bank, the British government, and consulted for the former Startup America Partnership. Importantly, he is passionate about women business owners fully taking stage in global businesses and developing leading-edge means to fund their startups. His passion is driven by the loving memory of his mother, who excelled at defying norms and showing him the worth of women everywhere. Tune in for this high-level listen into the world of funding, entrepreneurship, and his incredible work on behalf of businesswomen and others. Let's get started. 2018, copyright Boomtank Media, LLC, fully enforced.
Welcome to the Boomtank Business Show for sharp female entrepreneurs and businesswomen who are ready to shine. A show about more freedom, more income, less worries, and cutting-edge information for you to create and grow your business. From branding to social media, marketing to the latest technologies, we've got you covered. Now, here's your host, Carolyn Cole.
Welcome to the Boomtank Business Show for sharp female entrepreneurs and cool guys who support them. This is a show about building your business and your personal development. Why personal development? Because your personal growth is the biggest key to your business success. I am your show host, Carolyn Cole, founder and business owner of Boomtank.com. I was a Fortune 100 and Fortune 200 company senior trial attorney. Now I make the case on behalf of your business dreams and happiness too. The Boomtank brand is growing. I help executives, high-level teams, entrepreneurs, and business owners with their business and personal development needs. I'm also an organization development consultant, a business strategist, an entrepreneur, podcast show host, live streamer, professional speaker, and a certified professional coach. Contact me to discuss your individual group and or team needs. My premier success and personal development coaching is included in all of my packages. For executives, company officers, and teams, I consult and coach on message, mission, leadership, life design, and professional public speaking. On the organization development side, I consult and coach on change management, leadership, and mission statements. For entrepreneurs and business owners, I offer professional online public speaking and PR readiness consulting and coaching on claiming your expert celebrity with professional live streaming, live stream show creation, podcasting, podcast guesting, virtual summit presentation, professional talk creation, professional public speaking, media one-sheet preparation, and pitching. I help you go pro now to confidently get seen and get heard. Visibility is the lifeblood of your business. Let me expertly help get you PR ready. For entrepreneurs and business owners, I also offer professional review and pricing for your business packages. It's time to create high-value, correctly priced offers, programs, and services to create a business you can scale. I also include my Momentum Ball coaching designed to get your momentum ball rolling and keep it rolling. Go to Boomtank.com and click on my coaching consulting tab to read more and to book a session with me to discuss your needs, or email me, Carolyn@Boomtank.com. Let's talk about designing a package that expertly meets your needs. And to book me as your next professional speaker, podcast show guest, or other featured guest, click the speaking tab on Boomtank.com to send me a request or email me, Carolyn@Boomtank.com. I speak on a variety of business and inspirational topics and would love to hear from you. Now back to the show, Boomtank.com. So honored to have today's guest, Dr. Richard Swart. He is a recognized authority on early-stage capital, innovation, and alternative finance. He recently served as the Director of Research for Innovation and Entrepreneurial Finance at UC Berkeley. He was just appointed as Senior Fellow in the Center for Financial Markets at the Milken Institute, specializing in female entrepreneurship. He is a Filene Research Fellow in the Institute for Money, Technology, and Financial Inclusion at UC Irvine. He serves on the board of the Center for Alternative Finance at the University of Cambridge and is a board member or advisor to blockchain, investment platforms, and other financial tech companies. He works on issues of financial inclusion, social impact, and education with groups ranging from the World Bank, the British government, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and I believe, Richard, I saw Rockefeller Foundation as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, Rockefeller, Aspen Institute, Roosevelt Foundation, several others.
Beautiful. And many other global organizations. Between his academic research relapses. He has been the COO of a successfully exited startup, so we have the entrepreneurial piece we want to discuss today, and has worked on several national initiatives, including Startup America. He just started work on his second book, looking at how artificial intelligence is changing the nature of investing and capital access. He got a late start being a dad, has a son in kindergarten, and a precious 9-year-old daughter whom he blames for his gray hair. Welcome to the show. Really excited to have you here today, Richard. Thank you for being on the show.
It's my honor, Carolyn. Thank you.
Please tell the listeners, Richard, what it is you do.
I'm happy to try to make it easy. So the easiest way to think of me is a relapsed, recovering academic. I started life as a professor, and then I got the entrepreneurial buzz. Joined a couple of startups, had a successful exit with one of them, and then I sort of fell back into this really interesting space of how do you help other entrepreneurs be more successful, and why do so many entrepreneurs fail, given the wealth of resources and information that are out there. So through that, I started working with groups like Steve Case, the founder of America Online, and his Startup America initiative, got involved in lots of national and international projects around entrepreneurship. Then all of a sudden, this new thing called crowdfunding showed up, and I got incredibly excited about crowdfunding and the ways it can be used. And I then started doing research and started getting pulled back into a number of research and academic appointments where I've led teams that are trying to make sense of all these radical changes that are making the world a hopefully better place and an easier place for people to raise capital to fund their innovation. So I'm an advisor and a consultant and a professor all wrapped into one.
What did leaving academia and entering entrepreneurship teach you about entrepreneurship and about academia?
The hardest thing is the pace of change. Academia is somewhat like government or policy. It changes incredibly slowly, and from the point of having an idea to writing an article to getting it published can be 2 or 3 or 4 years. So by the time the article comes out, oftentimes it's a moot point. Whereas in the world of entrepreneurship, and when I jumped in with both feet in the late 2000s, it was in the era of lean startups and startup canvases, and it was all about rapid iteration and sort of loose and agile modeling, and it was the exact opposite intellectual framework where you don't necessarily have to have a rigorous understanding. You have to move fast and think fast and act. So those two worlds can't be more opposite. But the beautiful thing is, ultimately, being an academic teaches you to understand how to make sense of data and how to make decisions about what the data is telling you. And so any good entrepreneur has to be a scientist. He or she needs to be able to learn from their customers and learn from the market and make sense of the data coming in. So that's why academics oftentimes do really well in entrepreneurship, if we can make the culture shift into solving problems using our analytical abilities. But we have to learn to move fast, and that's something that I think most academics struggle with.
Is what you have just described your biggest entrepreneurial lesson to date?
No, I think the biggest lesson is that most entrepreneurs, this is a loaded one because I've done a lot of work all over the world with entrepreneurs. First of all, most entrepreneurs really fail because they don't understand money and finance. The single greatest cause of entrepreneurial failure is cash flow management, or the inability to take care of the books. Oftentimes it's not that they don't understand their business, they don't know how to run a business from a financial point of view. So I think a lot of entrepreneurs fall down because they're bluntly financially illiterate. Secondly, there's a overdependency on consultants and coaches and people that sort of help motivate you. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs need to really just spend time with customers and be out in their market and really learn by doing. There's an interesting phenomenon of being in the culture of entrepreneurship, but being afraid to take the jump of actually doing things. I've seen people working on ideas for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years, and then oftentimes tell me they like the idea of entrepreneurship. They're afraid to take the risk to actually become an entrepreneur.
The reality is time-tested business and what works and what doesn't work only happens when you get in, as Gary Vaynerchuk says, you get punched in the face a few times, if not a lot of times. That's where the seasoning comes from, actually getting the business chops. What do you recommend for entrepreneurs who are incredibly idea savvy and incredibly innovative but lack that financial literacy, as you say? What would you recommend to them?
It's going to sound really simplistic, but knock on the door of your local small business development center or SBA resource center or women's business center. And most of the time they will have 1 or 2 mentors there that will help you understand your books. But I think part of that dependency challenge is that people are dependent on their bookkeeper or accountant, and they don't actually know what the numbers mean. They don't understand how to manage against their numbers. And I'm also speaking from personal experience. My second startup was a failure that I started after my first one. And this is a hard-won lesson for me. I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I ultimately failed because I was not managing my cash flow. And that was, mea culpa, admission to your audience. But being a highly educated, Ivy League academic doesn't mean I was able to keep my eye on the ball. And in this case, the ball for me was, am I managing my projections of cash flow and expenses and employee hiring adequately? And I literally needed someone to coach me through how to manage on a day-to-day basis my books. I literally went down to the SBA Center and said, I need help. But unfortunately, it was too late for me. So I think that financial literacy is crucial. There's the Goldman Sachs Women's Business Program. There's the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses. There's lots of resources out there, but I think the key is if you don't have a mentor who can sort of, if you will, be your accountability partner over financial literacy, then go get one.
Share with us the source of your passion for helping women and minority groups get the funding they need. You definitely have a passion for both.
The short answer is I had an incredible mother. She was raised in a small farm town in Idaho. And during World War II, she would go to the fences of the POW camps and started chatting with the POWs, and she quickly realized they were just a bunch of scared kids that had been drafted into a horrible war. And she became a pacifist, and she moved to Japan in 1951. And this is a girl who grew up in a town of 300 people in the middle of nowhere, Idaho, and learned Japanese and studied Buddhism and the culture, and became a very vocal and strong war protester throughout the Korean War and the Vietnamese War. And she raised me with this global sense, having traveled the world. She came back to the U.S., got married. I came around a few years later. But, as a strong, dynamic woman who was not afraid to break conventions, she taught me very early on that most men are unable to see the strength of women and that our culture isn't necessarily the best, and to really take a global view and try to understand the needs and the requirements of all cultures and people from around the world. And it sounds like political correctness, but in her case, it was literally the DNA of her life. So I was raised by a powerful, not financially successful woman, but someone who lived her values and was incredibly outspoken. She was a zero population growth advocate. She was a women's liberation advocate. So I guess I was, genetically primed to be a feminist and was raised by a strong feminist. So for me, it's an honoring of my mother who's passed many years ago, but also just seeing the women in her circles. I realized that too many women don't take the chance. They don't get on the boat and go to Japan, or they don't have opportunities to explore, whether it's new business ideas, opportunities, ways of making local impact. So I always encourage people to take that leap, like my mother did.
So blessed this is part of your DNA, Richard. It's leading you to do such great global work for everyone. Thank you for the story. That's great sharing. I really appreciate it.
I'm happy to honor her.
When you and I initially exchanged emails, you said you would like to speak to how data science will change the face of investing and help women entrepreneurs. What did you mean by that?
It's actually really exciting, Carolyn, because I've been watching venture capital and angel investing both as an investor and as an academic for about a decade now. And there's a huge amount of research out there that makes it quite clear that there's both a racial bias and a gender lens that is used in investment decision making. And there's tons of articles out there that describe how terrible the problem is. You also have the simple fact that the vast majority of general partners in venture capital firms are old white guys, which I am one myself, but that doesn't necessarily lead to the best decision making. And the challenge is that oftentimes a female founder coming into a pitch session at an angel network or a venture capital firm, she's not battling just to justify, the fundamentals of the business model. She's fighting this implicit battle of gender bias. And despite decades of research and hundreds of workshops and tons of work, including Trish Costello at the Coffin Fellows program at the Coffin Foundation, and done amazing work, we really haven't seen the needle move very much, maybe 1% change in the last decade in funding levels for women. So the question is, how do you get rid of that bias? And one of the things that's being done is using artificial intelligence and data science to evaluate and score startups that are applying for funding. And what we're finding is that some of the platforms that are doing that are surfacing and funding many women entrepreneurs that are being rejected by traditional venture capital firms. If you will, the data science isn't biased, and it is picking winners without having that gender lens. One example is CrowdSmart. Full disclosure, I'm one of their scientific advisors, been involved in their strategy for a few years. There's a couple of other VC firms that are doing it, but the difference, if you will, between CrowdSmart and a company like AngelList is a platform to apply for and connect to angel investors, but it's still the old boys club. You syndicate and you invest alongside somebody, almost always male, who has a history of making good investments. So it's literally you're just following along with some other person and you're making a new boys club. Our model at CrowdSmart is purely data science driven, objective scoring, and we also have to score and evaluate the other scorers. So if you will, everything's being measured. And what that does is, since the model allows you to just determine the reasons behind the scores that the people are giving these startups, and so those have to be justified and they're visible and transparent, it seems like it removes a lot of the bias. So in that particular example, 21% of the companies being funded are by women founders, which is still not half, but it's a heck of a lot better than what you'd see in any other venture firm or angel investment network. In a traditional VC, you'll have one partner who will lead the decision making, and you look at having a junior associate go and look at the company. But literally, you're talking about a couple of conversations between a couple of people, normally males, in private offices, in a setting where it's very easy to sort of let that bias creep into the conversation, even if unconscious, which most of it is. In this setting, everything is transparent, everything is visible, and everything is digital. You also have our model at CrowdSmart is we intentionally have built a diverse community. So women, women of color, geographical diversity, international diversity, sector diversity. And the research is absolutely clear that a diverse group of people make better decisions, which is why women on boards of directors those companies outperform companies that don't have women on boards of directors. So we've engineered the model to include women and women of color in the very beginning of the process. And we know that there's a massive amount of bias, even in crowdfunding, and this is not a crowdfunding platform, but in all these forms of investing. It seems like the antidote to the bias is the intentional inclusion of women and women of color or males of color onto the investment decision making. And whether it's just the social pressure of not being able to be as explicitly biased because your colleague is sitting right next to you, or whether it's just they insert a new voice or they're able to be more objective in their evaluations, we're not sure, but we know that intentional diversity from the beginning helps to remove most of those effects.
Give us a window into your work with the Milken Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the other foundation work you've done.
The work with Milken specifically around women, women's access to capital. The work with the Gates Foundation and Rockefeller and Roosevelt and several other foundations really, to be honest, started with a conversation like this. Hi, I'm the director of such and such program inside the Gates Foundation. We know you're an expert on crowdfunding. How can we use crowdfunding, or how can we use marketplace lending, or how can we use some of these new models of finance to help us make the world more inclusive? So, for example, I went down to Kenya and I helped do training of how you can connect African entrepreneurs working on climate and energy projects through these platform models to American and European investors who want to support clean energy projects. So that wasn't women focused, but it was the idea of making bridges between different communities using technology. And so that's a lot of the work I've done, is how do you create change through leveraging technology to increase social connection. Sounds fancy, but it's basically saying, can you build better bridges through technology than you can without technology?
American Express each year, and I believe it's for the past 9 or 10 years, has done a State of Women-Owned Business report for women-owned businesses in the U.S. This is the 2017 report. I'm going to be reading from that. As of January 2017, there are an estimated 11.6 million women-owned businesses in the United States that employ nearly 9 million people and generate more than $1.7 trillion in revenues. Over the past 20 years, the number of women-owned businesses has grown 114% compared to the overall national growth rate of 44% for all businesses. Women-owned businesses now account for 39% of all U.S. firms. Here's something else that's interesting from entrepreneur.com. It's a September 28, 2016 article, Why Women Entrepreneurs Have a Harder Time Finding Funding, by Jared Hecht. He's a guest writer. His numbers are different from today's numbers, but he said it in his article. Women entrepreneurs run 30% of all small businesses and together employ 7.9 million people and generate $1.4 trillion in sales, and that is as of 2015. He goes on to say, women-owned businesses, however, receive just 7% of venture capital investment money, which is highly disproportionate to their role in the economy. Additionally, loan approval rates for female entrepreneurs is 15 to 20% less than it is for men. Clearly, something is not right. How do you see now Richard, that number for venture capital and the number for bank loans? Is it getting better? Is it getting better in small stages? Is it getting worse? I believe from what you told me with the new technology, it's going to improve. But what is the current state of that in your mind and your experience?
Yeah, unfortunately, not much has changed. These new platforms are demonstrating the capability of these models to be less biased, but they're still representing a fraction of 1% of the total market. So if you will, there's an innovation occurring that the vast majority of the market isn't paying attention to. And there's also a massive amount of institutional structure and reasons why people don't want there to be change. So we have to break this down into two very distinct discussions. So you have funding for small businesses, going for a bank loan, going for an SBA loan, versus funding for a high growth capacity startup. And those are incredibly different animals that are oftentimes confused. So we know, unfortunately, the single best predictor of whether a small business owner will receive a loan is the race and gender of the loan officer in a bank, meaning that an African-American entrepreneur has a very low chance of getting the loan approved unless the initial loan officer who sees the person is himself or herself an African-American. It sounds like I'm making an extreme statement here, but that's actually pretty close representation of what it looks like inside a lot of the South and areas that are heavily minority in the United States. And there's a lot of distrust of banks because of the long history of racism. Now, some of the credit unions and some of the community banks are doing a much better job. And they are starting to be much more egalitarian or fair in their lending decision making. But there's a lot of loading, and it gets into the data science, but a lot of banks use a number of predictors that are not just your FICO score, what zip code you're in, what school you went to, where you live. And unfortunately, there's loading, meaning if you're from a moderate income neighborhood, that increases your score. If you're from a moderate income neighborhood that is next to a low income neighborhood, your crime scores go up. There's a lot of this data science is sucking in information about your location, your neighborhood, where you live, where you're trying to launch your business, that ironically increases the perception of risk as opposed to increases the perception of opportunity, that there's probably a need here. So, data science doesn't solve all of these problems. It has to sort of be trained and monitored like a new child does, if you will. But I think platforms like SoFi or Cabbage or some of these online lending platforms are oftentimes much better at being race blind and color blind and opening the doors of opportunity than local banks may be. And frankly, what I always tell entrepreneurs is talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, talk to people and find out who's actually lending in your community, because you'll oftentimes find huge discrepancies between different institutions, even though they should, in theory, have a similar rate of loans. Now, on the venture capital side, it's two things. You have to have an introduction. No one knocks on the door of a venture capital firm and gets a check. So it has to do with the ability of the entrepreneur to activate a network and get a warm introduction to a partner at the firm, and that introduction comes from somebody who can vouch for that entrepreneur. And that's one of the challenges that some women face of learning to get out there and tell their story compellingly and be assertive. And as our friend Judy Robinette would say, to make sure you're in the right room. And unfortunately, without those warm introductions, you will not get financed. So it goes back to being part of the club and who you know and who trusts you. So a lot of financial capital is a byproduct of having good social capital. And that social capital is something that can be nurtured, but it's nurtured through one-on-one relationships, not through social media and Facebook.
And big thanks to Judy Robinette for this warm introduction to you. I would not have crossed your path and vice versa, but for her, I'm very grateful. She's episode 50. Please listen to that episode on power connecting, get in the right room, and just power connecting, even if it's not around funding, even if it's around your career, advancing any of your causes. I think it's a landmark book because all of the big business books, and we all know which ones they are that we have all read, none of them address that piece about the connection and the networking, and it is everything. We tend to think all the solutions are on paper. The reality is, and she said it, the solutions are connected to people. Do you agree with that, Richard, since we're on that point and it's such a big point to drive home?
Well, I absolutely do believe it, and I'll tell a story, is that about a decade ago, Judy was mentoring me. We're personal friends, and she said, Richard, you're a brilliant guy. you really can make a bigger impact in the world. You need to spread your wings, and here's a couple of things you should do. So if you will, I'm one of her first coaching clients. I took her advice, and I ended up telling the British Parliament what to do, and I've spoken to bank presidents around the world, and I've lectured on 5 continents. So through following some of her techniques and following some of her advice, I've had a radical transformation in my own career. So I'm a big fan of Judy, and I've learned, like, even this opportunity at the Milken Institute came through social connection where someone made a recommendation. So oftentimes opportunities come when you show interest in and the ability to help others.
Judy's book is How to Be a Power Connector, the 5 + 50 + 100 rule for turning your business network into profits. Keep beating that drum because it was such a great interview, and this is a great interview. People need to hear that the real secret to entrepreneurship, to business, and to life, but it's the people. It's the people that you can help, the people who can help you, and so much of the entrepreneurial space, you know this, is really done in isolation. The work is in isolation. It's this whole dream of solopreneurship, and you strike out on your own. No. You partner with people. Did you find that when you were truly doing your entrepreneurial journey that it was so much a solo space?
It absolutely is lonely, especially in the very beginning, the first few months where it's you or maybe a partner and you're just getting going. It's somewhat psychologically overwhelming, especially for what I call the Fortune 500 refugees, people who have left the corporate world that are used to having rich resources, rich social connections. There's a lot of psychological comfort, even though there's a lot of frustration in that world. And all of a sudden you find yourself sitting in a co-working space without an assigned desk, with people zoomed in on their headphones, running off to closets to have phone calls. It looks like there's a lot of social interaction, but it's really an austere social environment. And I find that you have to have some really key mentors in your life. And I actually found a lot of those through getting active in meetups and finding interesting people. And I was, the first question I always ask when I go to a networking group is I find the person who organized it, and I'll say, here's what I'm working on. Who's the one person I have to meet before I leave tonight? And 99% of the time, I'd strike up a conversation with that one person. So I'm pretty intentional about how I find resources. And I think that most entrepreneurs are so into telling their elevator pitch, they're not able to articulate their needs. And I used to run a very large business network, and I'd raffle off or give away pitches. And it's, like, think of 500 people at a networking event. But I would always do the opposite. I'd say, you're not allowed to talk about your business. You're only allowed to ask for something you need to grow your business. And that mind shift of asking for specific concrete resources or introductions is hard for entrepreneurs to admit they don't know something or they need something. But if they can make that leap, oftentimes they're able to identify very specific or key people that make transformations in their business.
That is so powerful. I know you're writing a book now on artificial intelligence. Do you do other writings on entrepreneurship, on that connecting piece? And it's what she says too. It's so important. Somebody listening to this, Richard, it's true. If they do exactly what you just described and truly work the whole piece that you just said and do that, that could transform everything over the next 3 months, the next 6 months, and the next year.
It can, and I created a meetup group around this very idea, and it no longer exists, so I'm not trying to pitch anything. But in the first year, we did an evaluation, and just between the members of the group, we had generated over $11 million in business and growth. That's about 150 people, to put those numbers to that. And it then mushroomed into the fastest growing business meetup in American history. The reason being, I was very clear on 2 things. One, I hate sociopaths and I hate people that are takers, and I would kick people out if they had a sense of entitlement or narcissism. And secondly, I taught people to ask as opposed to pitch. So we're not talking about alternative finance, but these are some of the lessons back from my entrepreneurial days that I'm happy to share.
Back to this article here, he gives the story of Catherine Minshew, the co-founder of Muse. And for those who don't know, The Muse, you can find it at themuse.com. It is a website that provides advice, career advice, and business advice and jobs. It's a job career networking site. And this is what the author reports. He said her experience with funding is an alarming example of the uncalled for difficulties women have to put up with when they're looking for funding. While trying to raise capital for the Muse, Minshew reported encountering encountering closed doors as numerous venture capital firms claimed they were not in the market to hear her pitch. When she pushed further, she received hateful responses, tones mirroring the likes of, "Don't get too big for your britches." Even when her pitch was heard, she felt most mistook her leadership and confidence as charm rather than signs she could effectively grow a business. Eventually, Minshew did obtain funding only after contacting more than 200 capital firms. And this goes to your point, Richard. The author, Jared Heck says, Candida Brush, a professor of entrepreneurship at Babson College, has an insightful take on one of the main reasons why women do not get funding. She says the profile of successful entrepreneurship is male. And if we look at things like Shark Tank, they might have one female on the show, those kinds of things. Is that changing? The profile of successful entrepreneurship is largely male.
It's not changing fast enough, and I would still say that the stereotypical image of a successful entrepreneur in America is sort of conflated with the, handsome male athlete, aggressive type A personality, charging, all those metaphors of strength. I think on our subconscious level or cultural bias level, we still equate sort of male leadership qualities with business success. And I'll give you an example. I won't name names, but I advise a lot of family offices and ultra high net worth people. And I was working with one billionaire, and I asked him about his ridiculously bad record of early stage investing. 48 out of 49 early stage investments were failures. This is a billionaire, so obviously he's a smart gentleman. And I literally had him, and I'm again being careful to not give away enough information to allow the audience to figure out who I'm talking about. But this gentleman said that women don't have the strength or the stamina to be good leaders. And so he was literally selecting investment opportunities based on sort of alpha males. And the results speak for themselves in this particular case. So that's the really worst case example of looking for bias. Now, the good news is that there are some incredible communities of women like Astia and Golden Seeds and the 10,000 Women Business Program from Goldman Sachs. And there's Portfolio in San Francisco, and there's some quiet groups. There's a group in Seattle I'm connected to with some Amazon and Microsoft retirees, women that are finding and supporting and mentoring other women. So women have done a great job over the past 10 or 12 years of creating these intentional networks to mentor and train and invest in each other. And I oftentimes encourage women to seek those channels out because these are typically very sophisticated, experienced, exited entrepreneurs running these networks. I've been to some women's business events that sort of reinforce these images, and they're more focused on selling, cosmetics or home crafting or things that sort of feel like, again, nothing against stay-at-home mothers, but supporting side gigs to increase your revenue as a stay-at-home mother, as opposed to professional training to really launch and scale a growing business. And unfortunately, sometimes women end up in the wrong network. So I think it's important to make sure that your mentors have trod the path that you're trying to lead. And there's only about 3,000 people in America that have launched and exited more than 2 businesses in a stock exchange. We call them company builders. And there's only a few hundred of those that are women. So you have to do your homework, and you have to figure out who can be those mentors for you. But they are out there if you're willing to do the homework and find them.
The pro groups that you're talking about, Astia, Golden Seeds, Portfolio, I'm going to leave links to those in the show notes for this episode on boomtank.com. So please go there if you're interested in learning more about any of these. And you said earlier, Richard, that Portfolio consists of women helping women. It's successful female entrepreneurs who are now funding successful female entrepreneurs. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
It's a investment platform. Think of a crowdfunding platform, but for later stage companies, an alternative to venture capital. The entire executive team are women. They all are phenomenal rock stars. One of the women involved used to run Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google's family office. Trish Costello created Portfolio. She used to run entrepreneurship at Babson. She ran innovation for President Clinton. She was the head of the Coffin Foundation's Venture Fellows program, which was designed to bring women into venture capital. She's a force of nature. She's an amazing leader, and she organized this platform. So if you will, if you're that woman who's had your door slammed in the face by 200 VC firms, you should be knocking on the door of Portfolio if you've done your homework and if your company is the right stage, right fit for their investment model. But there are other groups like this that are intentional funds organized by women who invest in other women. And we're finding even in crowdfunding that there are women, if you will, searching or hunting for other women to invest in through these crowdfunding platforms. There's a community of women that are active and engaged and seeking opportunities to mentor and help each other. And oftentimes they are in communities where there's not a huge physical network, so they're using some of these platforms and investment models to find each other in the digital world.
Help us understand the opportunity with a group like Portfolio. What kind of startups are they looking to invest in?
Since they are a fund, meaning that they have investments from high net worth people and institutional investors that are looking for a fixed rate of return, they need companies that have a fairly substantial opportunity to grow. So what that translates to is a company that can have within 3 to 5 years hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. So this takes you away from a local architecture firm, which might be a fantastic small business that employs 10 or 20 people, or a food-based business. If you're not going to have national distribution for your food product, you probably don't have the growth potential of seeking institutional funding. So again, it's a question of growth potential of a startup. Now, there are some investors that will do venture debt or look at investing at an earlier stage. But if your company cannot realistically hit a $500 million valuation within 5 to 7 years, you probably shouldn't be talking to institutional investors. You probably need to look at other forms of financing. Now, Portfolio and most other platforms are very transparent about who they've invested in and what they're looking to invest in. And I always say, before you talk to a firm, talk to someone the firm's invested in. And typically there'll be a press release that XYZ company just took on a funding of so much money, and you can look at TechCrunch, you can look at PitchBook. There's sources of data that tell you who's been funded by whom. So do your homework, talk to people that have received money from them, find out what their interests are. Now, you should know as much about that fund and investor as they're going to know about you before you walk in the door.
Such a chicken and egg problem, especially for women and minorities who need the resources to even develop an idea that will come close to hitting those standards. Where would you recommend those two groups start if they have an idea? They're not even close to anything like Portfolio, but they have a great idea. Where can they get the mentoring? I know you mentioned the small business councils. Where else can they get mentoring to develop that idea and start building on that dream?
See, it's going to sound overly simplistic, but I think if a person has talked to 10 or 20 people and got validation through meetups and other business meetings, that they have a kernel of a good idea. And all ideas need polishing, but they have a kernel of a good idea. I have found that a lot of women professionals, attorneys, accountants, financial professionals, bank executives, if another woman were to call and say, I need to ask you for some mentoring, would you be willing to give me a half-hour conversation to help me figure out the right legal structure for something? If you ask for mentorship and you have a very specific request, my experience is the vast majority of people are more than happy to help others. And at some point it may lead to a professional relationship, but most people are willing to give away information at an early stage. Secondly, SBAs are great resources if you're early stage and this is your first entrepreneurial journey. It's the classic question of you don't know what you don't know. And so you have to have a mentor. And one reason I like the SBAs, and frankly, some of them are not so great. Some of them are. It just sort of depends on the quality of the leadership team. So be willing to get in your car if you have to. The other challenge is, especially women of color, is break out of your community. So that sounds like a racist comment, but again, there's only so much information in any community or any network. If you're African American in Los Angeles, try to find mentors that are Hispanic in San Francisco. Break out of your comfort zone a little bit culturally, racially, ethnically, and make sure you're getting information that's not just your local network. I've seen so many people get bound by the lack of information in their community. So someone has to be brave and be the trailblazer and go find other resources to help increase the level of knowledge in those communities.
2 follow-up points on that. The Small Business Administration, those chapters statewide, nationally, they do have women's incubator programs they run annually, yes, and you apply for those. And there's certain criteria, but investigate those. The other thing is I live streamed on this exact point, which is move beyond your pond. You have to. If you have big dreams are never confined to a pond. You do have to get out of your comfort zone, as you say, get in your car or get on a Zoom call, do something, and go find those other resources. Perfect advice. Thank you, Richard, for your work on behalf of women and minorities. It's such noble work. How can the listeners find you and how can you help?
2 things. The simplest way to find me is to look me up on LinkedIn and connect to me on LinkedIn and explain how we can add value to each other and how I could help you. I also publish almost everything on LinkedIn. Everyone, including Judy, tells me to get a great website up for myself. But right now, the best thing is just Richard Swart, PhD on LinkedIn. Secondly, I'm going to invite your audience to help me. So if they are interested in helping evaluate and score and train the women using this artificial intelligence platform I was talking about, and they have industry expertise, whether you're an expert, medical doctor, scientist, engineer, whatever, we're always trying to recruit bright women to add their knowledge and their insights and their expertise to this community that is helping identify other people to invest in through CrowdSmart. So crowdsmart.io, there's no cost, there's no fee. It's just simply an opportunity to participate in the evaluation of innovative companies. You have to be an investor. You have to be a qualified institutional or sophisticated or accredited investor. If you don't know any of those 4 terms, you probably shouldn't apply. But if you have expertise, we'd love to have you be part of our growing community of people trying to make a difference.
Terrific. Thank you once again for being on the show. Complete honor. I'm so appreciative of all the information you shared today.
Oh, it's been fun. Thanks again, Carolyn.
You can find all links mentioned by Richard on boomtank.com in the show notes for this episode. Let's connect on LinkedIn and Instagram. I'm Carolyn Cole live on both platforms. And thank you for tuning in to the Boomtank Business Show. I so appreciate you listening, and you know I do. If you like the show, please leave a 5-star rating and some nice comments on iTunes, or subscribe on the free Stitcher podcast listening app for Android users or Google Play. And tell a friend. Join Boomtank's email list at boomtank.com and download my free ebook, The Best Online Tools to Grow Your Business Now, containing over 75 plus hot links to grow your business. Be sure to check out my coaching and consulting tab on boomtank.com for my coaching and consulting services, and the speaking tab to book me as your next professional speaker or featured guest. And like Boomtank's business page at facebook.com/the Boomtank to join and watch my live streams. Until next time, free your mind, unleash your spirit, build your life, create your business. It really is your show. See you right here on the next episode.
Thank you for tuning in to the Daily Boomtank Business Show. Go to boomtank.com and get our exclusive tips and ideas to help you achieve success. It is time for you to launch your dream business and life now.